This is Ari Koretsky, and welcome to Jews You Should Know, introducing the broader community to interesting and inspiring Jewish men and women making a difference in our world. Some are already famous, some not yet so, but each is a Jew you should know. We are here with Meredith Polsky, founder and director of Matan, and a wonderful community activist. How are you, Meredith?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me. How are you?
Thank you for joining us. I'm doing wonderfully. And for those listeners out there, Meredith is probably the first guest that I've come across who I learned about by being at an event and hearing her be honored at a particular community event and saying, wow, I have to meet this person. I ran over to her after the event and introduced myself. So I'm very excited to speak with you. Meredith, tell us a little bit about where you're from and kind of what your upbringing was like.
Sure. I'm actually originally from Rockland County, New York, Spring Valley, actually just outside of Muncie.
Sure.
And I grew up in a pretty traditional conservative household, went to synagogue every week, had Shabbat dinner every week. We weren't always, the most observant, but we definitely spent Shabbat as a family. I was the granddaughter of a rabbi. I'm now also the sister of a rabbi.
Oh, wow.
Conservative. So Jewish life was definitely very much a big part of our upbringing. I went to Camp Ramah.
Which one?
Camp Ramah in the Berkshires.
Berkshires, okay.
The New York camp. And I, was always at Hebrew school, went to Hebrew high school, at Prosdor at the Jewish Theological Seminary of America in Manhattan. And the truth is I never, ever thought about being a Jewish educator, ever. And so the path that I've sort of found myself on is really interesting. Not that I felt disconnected to my Jewish upbringing or anything like that. It just was never, it was just never in the cards.
Not on the radar, right?
Yeah. So
I'm curious, where was your grandfather a rabbi? In Rockland County?
No, mostly he retired to Rockland County. He was mostly in Irvington, New Jersey.
Okay.
And before that in Louisville, Kentucky. And
oh, wow.
Places, so, yeah. Yep.
Do you remember visiting him in Louisville, or that was before your time?
I believe that was before my time. I do remember Irvington.
Irvington. Very cool. And now you said you have a sibling who's a rabbi as well?
I do. My brother, Rabbi David Englander, is a rabbi at B'nai Torah congregation in Boca Raton.
Oh, and Boca is a smart man.
Yeah. He doesn't understand why anybody would live anywhere but Florida. So.
Well, you know what? In summer, it's not that great, so it's not. But during the winter, I'll grant him that. Absolutely. I have two brothers that live both in South Florida, and I love jet skiing. So it's a great excuse to go visit them. And
we always say, it's nice to have Pesach by the pool when you can.
Pesach by the pool. That's it. That's it. So you said you weren't necessarily thinking about, Jewish education or Jewish communal work. What was kind of your early trajectory from a career standpoint? Where did you go to college and so forth?
So I went to the University of Michigan for undergrad.
Go Blue. There you go.
Go Blue, yes. I majored in psychology, and I knew that I wanted to do something with kids. I think I always pretty much knew that. I thought I would do something in the realm of child psychology, and that was sort of the direction I was headed. When I finished college, I, studied for the GREs and took the GREs and all of that kind of thing. And then as I was researching schools and PhD programs, what I sort of discovered was that, the focus is much more on research than actually interacting with kids.
Especially in a PhD, I would imagine.
Exactly. And so then I was like, well, maybe that's not what I want to do. But then I really had no idea what I wanted to do. So I had finished at Michigan. I was living on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, because when you're from New York, that's what you do after college. I was living in Manhattan. Yeah. I was perfectly happy. And I was working actually at that time full-time for the Camp Ramah in the Berkshires office, I think mostly because they had pity on me, and I just really knew
were you like a lifelong camp person? Like
I was.
12 years?
Yeah, I worked at camp until I got married. So.
Wow.
At which point my husband said, you're done. So I was doing that while I was trying to figure out,
Right.
what was going to be my next step.
Wow. So you're working in the Ramah office, and how old are you? This like 22, 23 kind of?
22. Yeah.
Right. And what ultimately coalesced for you, or what kind of crystallized for you
Yeah.
moving forward? How did you kind of move in a new direction?
Yeah, so basically, as part of my contract with Ramah, working full time during the year, I had very early on sort of agreed that I would come back to be a division head for the second summer. So I knew, I might not know what I was going to do with my life, but I knew what I was doing that summer. So I went back to camp. And I always worked with the youngest kids, which I loved. They were about 8, 9 years old, going into 4th grade. And so I was a division head for the second summer in a row with those kids. And basically, I mean, this is how my story goes. I got on the bus on the first day of camp, and I was like very excited, starting camp season. And I said, "Hi, everyone. I'm Meredith. Welcome to camp." And a little boy from the front row looked up at me and very earnestly said, "Like I care." And I said, "Oh," and I knew he was one of mine because we had like special shirts for them because they were
right.
and we wanted to be able to find them and all of that. And I sort of knew instinctively that he was going to be my most challenging camper, but that he was also going to be my favorite camper. And I was right on both counts. And Josh, it turned out, I call him Josh, had significant learning disabilities, attention issues, social challenges that made it really difficult for him to successfully interact with the other kids in his bunk. Now I want to say cabin. In New York, it was only bunk, but my kids go to camp here and it's cabin.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So I'll stay true to my New York roots for now. So he, I think also really to his disadvantage was that he had come to camp and most of his bunkmates were kids that he was also at school with. So I think there were just a lot of preconceived notions about who Josh was and what he was capable of and what he wasn't capable of. And that coupled with his own challenges and coupled with, 18-year-old counselors who, to no fault of their own, don't really know.
Not trained, not equipped.
What to do with a kid like this. Josh and I ended up spending a lot of time together and I loved it. I mean, he was definitely like my kind of kid. But it was really challenging, for the bunk and for sort of like the whole system. And basically what happened was that after 6 days, the administration of camp decided that this really wasn't working, that Josh was really taking up way too much time from, one particular staff member. And I was supposed to be overseeing all the kids,
right.
all the counselors. And I definitely was spending, a disproportionate amount of time with Josh. And so after 6 days of camp, Josh was actually sent home. And again, I this was going back, 20 plus years. I get older and older every time I tell this story. But, I don't blame the camp either. At that time, it wasn't on everybody's radar screen and it wasn't something that we were necessarily equipped with or had the resources for. I will say very shortly after that summer, Camp Ramah, the Berkshires, created a committee. I was on the founding committee for what became their Brera program, which is specifically intended for kids like Josh, kids who are physically able because the terrain of camp isn't super accessible, but were able to be in a bunk with other kids, but just need some extra support. So I'm really proud. I didn't have too much to do with that Brera program after the beginning, but I'm really proud that campers like Josh now certainly do have a place at Ramah, and I think that's really important. I'm not looking to, disparage anyone or anything, and they really did, the right thing in terms of their growth and, learning and things like that. But for Josh, he was sent home on day 6, and I was really devastated by that. It was really, really hard on me. Josh and I wrote letters back and forth through the rest of that summer. He would actually write to me, he was like 8 years old. He would write to me on like big pieces of construction paper and marker.
Right.
I actually have them somewhere. I could probably, take
How did he deal with the rejection?
I mean, this is the part I don't remember quite as clearly, but I remember he was really sad.
Yeah.
I don't remember the ins and outs of who told him what, or, I just remember he was sad. And what I also don't remember, and it may be because I wasn't 100% involved in this aspect just as a unit head, but I don't know how his parents reacted at the time. And I don't know, sort of the intricacies of what that was like for them. I do know that he was sad to leave, and I was really sad to have him leave. So we wrote letters back and forth, and then the summer ended and the letters ended, and as it happens. So that October, so camp ended, of course, like at the end of August, and that October I called a friend of mine who I knew, who was a camp person, and I knew was a teacher at the Jewish day school that Josh attended. And I called him up and I said, hey, I just really wanted to see how Josh was doing. And he said, oh, I don't know. He got kicked out of school.
Oy vey.
And it was like, I don't know if before this, if I believed in light bulb moments. And I told you I had never planned to go into Jewish education, but that was my light bulb moment. And I just felt like, again, like I don't know how his parents responded. I didn't know them personally, but I just felt like here was this family that really tried to give their kid the best of what Jewish education could offer. We always hear about Jewish summer camp and Jewish day school and all of these things. And I just felt like here was a family that was rejected at every turn. And I thought, okay, I guess this is what I'm going to do with my life. I'm going to figure out how to fix this problem that I only thought was a problem because of this one kid. But then I started talking, so maybe not, the best career choice, but I started talking to lots and lots of other people. And everybody had a story of their own Josh, whether it was their own kid or a family they knew or a friend. And so I decided that this was really something that I wanted to sort of immerse myself in and try to do something about. So
amazing. I want to ask you because I want to hear exactly how you did that. But I want to just sort of reflectively understand, how did you know at that initial moment on the bus, this kid kind of throws down the gauntlet, giving you like that challenge. And you very interestingly said that you knew right away he would be challenging, but also that he would be your favorite. How did you know that?
You know what? To this day, like he was just my kind of kid. There's just something about kids who, might come across as sort of like behaviorally challenged, but like even then, I guess, like now I know because I've studied it, but I think even then, like I sort of had this sense that like kids don't misbehave just to misbehave. Like something else is going on, right? Like they're communicating something. And for me, I always had a thing about like wanting to uncover that, whether a kid was struggling emotionally because something was going on at home, or, behaviorally because of learning challenges or anything else. I mean, those were always the kids, even as a camp counselor, that like, they were like my kids, like,
do you think there was something like in your own background or personality or upbringing that sort of made you more, because lots of people encounter the same kids, but their reaction isn't the same as yours was. There's something about you kind of like was just sort of open to that.
Now I feel like I'm in therapy. I don't know.
I won't bill you, Meredith.
No, thanks. I honestly don't know the answer to that question. So many people go into special education or especially Jewish inclusion because, they were a parent of, or they had a sibling
or, yeah.
I didn't have any of that. And obviously, my idea to do this professionally came about long before I had my own kid. So I'm not really sure. Maybe I should, dig deeper and again at some point, and maybe I'll have better.
Gotta leave something for a second podcast.
Yeah, I guess so.
I like the tease. That's good.
So I'm really not sure, but I know that I was always drawn to those kids, even if, as a first year counselor, the kid who like couldn't stop crying because she was so homesick. Like, she's got 3 kids of her own now. Like, she's the kid I'm still in touch with. She's
right.
30-something.
30, right.
Those are, I don't know, for whatever reason, those were the kids. I don't mean to group them as like those.
No, I understand. Right, but there's something that spoke to you.
They were the kids I was most drawn to. Maybe I felt like, I could have like a bigger impact, maybe, I don't know. I was very homesick as a child at camp, so I sort of get the homesick part. I'm not so sure about like the special needs and disabilities part.
Right.
I think that was just sort of, I don't know, who I was or what
That's
I
interesting, because
was.
even if we can't always diagnose sort of our reactions or why something touches us in a certain way, I do think it's a very Jewish idea, actually, the notion of really listening deeply to our own inner voice and seeing what does touch us. Because at least I think from a Jewish perspective, perhaps that's the divine voice calling us towards something, and maybe we don't need to know why exactly, or the sort of the clinical reason, but the fact is that it's there and it demands something of us, and clearly you took that seriously.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like the Jewish version of the light bulb moment, some kind of divine force, because there is very little other explanation for it. I mean, the fact that at 22 years old, I had this sort of, what I call light bulb moment, but also I was naive enough, like, not to know how incredibly challenging it was going to be to start a nonprofit organization, so I think it was sort of right place, right time, and, a whole mix of a variety of factors that sort of, came together to allow it to happen. And so, I said earlier, I had already ditched the PhD idea.
Right.
So when I had this idea, and it was really more than an idea, it was really like, there was no question, this is what I was going to do.
And did you know right away, like, I want to start an organization that, like, what was
Kind
you
of,
had one
yeah.
idea, or was it more like, I just want to help these kids somehow?
No. So that's such a good question. You ask really good questions. I don't think there was ever a moment where I thought, oh, I want to go teach Hebrew school for kids, who learn differently. That probably would have been a much more reasonable response,
Right.
right? But I don't think that ever, wow, I don't think that was ever what I thought. I think it was like, I am going to change this experience for Jewish families everywhere. I really think that's what went through my head. And it seemed at the time somehow perfectly reasonable.
Why not?
To have no job and no money, and, this is what I was going to do. So I decided, I did like a very little bit of research, but I decided that sort of the skills and knowledge I needed would be in special education and in social work, because I figured the social work, the special ed piece was sort of clear. Like, obviously, if I want to understand kids, with learning differences,
Sure,
and disabilities, special education made sense. And the social work piece, I think partly because I still had, I had thought about psychology for so long, but also I think with social work, you really learn about systems.
Yep.
And, community systems and family systems, organizational systems, in a way that I didn't think I was going to get from the special education side. So there was I think there still is a program in New York. It's a dual degree program in special education and social work at Bank Street College and Columbia University. So I just kind of thought, okay, I think that's what I should do. And this was literally like, I made the phone call in October. This was October. And so I applied to that one dual degree program. And I always say, luckily I got in. I really didn't have a backup plan. And I felt like this real sense of urgency. And I actually started the program that January.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So like less than 3 months after that phone call, I was enrolled in graduate school. And so the way it worked, because I started in January, I had to sort of like do the year of social work between like, I think January and August or something like that. So I did summer classes and I did all, and
Intense.
I know I was in like a huge rush. I like,
you got to change the world. Hurry up and graduate.
I know. It's really what I felt like. And so it's basically like a 3-year program, and I might have done it in a little bit less time. I don't even remember now. But so I was getting these 2 master's degrees, and basically, grad school is all about like different projects and diving into different ideas and things like that. So I really was able to spend sort of those 3 years researching and studying and interviewing and mapping out what would eventually become Matan. And during those years, I was able to get some teaching experience, some more Hebrew school experience, regular classroom experience, special ed teaching experience, and talk to just a lot of rabbis and communal professionals and BJE people and, all kinds of different folks to figure out, what I was going to create. It was never that, I'm going to go work in the inclusion division of the BJE. I don't know why. Again, it would have made a lot more sense, but that's where I was headed. And during that time, I met a couple of other women who sort of were on the same wavelength and had similar experiences. One with her own kids and one with, with other people's kids, like myself. And so we just started to brainstorm and map out and see if we could work together. And by that time, I was teaching, I think it was around the same time, I was already teaching full-time at a Jewish day school in Manhattan. So I was done with school, but I was still really, working on this idea. And as it turned out, it was exactly when, so it was around the year 2000, and it was exactly when the Jewish community was really starting to think about sort of like this social entrepreneur piece, right? It was the beginning of what was called Bikurim at what was Jesna and UJC. None of these things exist anymore. It was the beginning of Joshua Venture. It was, it was really the very start of the Jewish community thinking about, okay, there are these young people out there who are thinking about Jewish life in different ways. What do we do about that? How do we cultivate that? How do we, support sort of this next generation?
I think it very much paralleled the .com movement. That sort of startup mentality that began emerging.
Yeah, exactly. So it was, I think about Martin Kaminer, who, had this vision for Bikurim. And I had literally never written a grant proposal before, never probably even saw a grant proposal before. But somebody told me about this Bikurim project, and they were accepting applicants for their first cohort of incubator organizations. And so we applied for it and we interviewed and we wrote this grant, and it's crazy looking back, but we were accepted. And it was really it was really the start of Matan, because we had, they gave us a small, a cubicle, at Jesna. So it felt like we were something real, and it didn't provide money, but it provided a lot of supports, in terms of training, in terms of a physical location, in terms of helping us learn, how to officially start a not-for-profit, all these things that clearly had never occurred to me that I would need to know, how to write a budget, how to, all of these things. And just soon after we got into Bikurim, Joshua Venture announced a call for proposals for its first cohort. And basically what happened was they had a target age group in mind. So you had, I don't remember what it was, but you had to be between this age and that age. And of myself and my co-founders, I was the only one who fit into that window. So we were like, okay, I guess you're
the face.
Apply for this. And it was based out of San Francisco. And they flew me out to San Francisco for an interview. It all seemed really crazy at the time. And I was still teaching full time. And then after my workday, I would go to the Jesna offices and I would sit at my Matan office and figure out, what I was going to do. So I got into Joshua Venture. And so that really allowed me, because that did come with a bit of money. So it allowed me to sort of, quit my day job, if you will. The following year, I wasn't teaching full time. And I really was just working on Matan. So the way that things emerged, my colleagues still had other jobs. And so I became sort of the default in charge person.
Lead, right.
And then it just sort of evolved from there. And ultimately, actually, they both left the organization. And so the first one left pretty early on. And then the second one, as she was getting ready to leave, we wrote a grant so that ultimately I'd be able to hire an executive director. And that's what we did. And so, it was sort of a crazy confluence of events that worked out really well. But again, if I knew what I didn't know, I'm not sure I could have taken all the leaps.
That's why they often tell people to get married young.
Probably true.
It just when you were first starting this, when you first had this initial, call it light bulb moment, epiphany, crystallization, did you do some initial research within the broader Jewish community just to see, like, does anything like what I want to do exist in any way? And then I imagine you must have done more research in that regard, like once you were really getting into it within grad school. What did you, or maybe didn't you, find out there, and what did you really feel you needed to come and, what void did you feel you needed to come and fill through Matan?
Such a great question. So when I was first envisioning Matan, I really envisioned it as a New York-based direct service organization. So my sort of vision at the time, and this is what I ultimately did for the first bunch of years, was really to go like from synagogue to synagogue and school to school and, have families call and say, hey, we need X, Y, and Z help. So I was really focused on researching in the New York area. And basically what I found at the time, and again, this is going back a whole bunch of years, but basically what I found at the time was the BJE, the Bureau of Jewish
Board of Jewish Education,
in New York. And they did have Rabbi Marty Schloss at the time was doing all of their special needs work and doing incredible things, but really focused on the Orthodox day school world. So I felt like, okay, so I'm not going to do that. That won't be my focus. But I feel like, the vast majority of kids, I think now it's like 80% of kids who receive a Jewish education receive that Jewish education through supplemental Hebrew school programs. So like, afternoon Hebrew school, Sunday Hebrew school. So I felt like, well, that's where I want to focus because, for a variety of different reasons. But it seemed, first of all, the day school piece was, at least in New York, at least in the Orthodox day schools, the BJE did have a reach for that. So I really thought that we were going to do direct service for congregational Hebrew schools. And we did that for a long time. I mean, that's, the only way I got paid for, a whole bunch of years. And it was interesting because, now you hear Jewish inclusion and like, you've probably heard about it, whether it's on your Facebook feed or somebody sends an article. But at the time, nobody was talking about Jewish inclusion. It just wasn't a thing. So I was literally knocking on doors of synagogues, telling them that this was like a huge problem, right? Like a huge issue that they needed to fix. And that, oh, by the way, you need to hire me to help you fix the problem. And it was, again, I don't know what made me think that I could do that, but that's what I did. I went from synagogue to synagogue. I really helped them evaluate their programs and what was going on because, I would go to some schools and they'd say, well, 65% of our kids get pulled out for Hebrew support. And I was thinking, well, something's not going right in the classroom, if the majority of your kids are being pulled out. So we would look at the program, we would think about different models, how to address the different learning needs.
So you would end up helping them kind of reconfigure their actual mainstream education as well.
Exactly. And to this day, I really feel like inclusion is not just about the kids with special needs or disabilities. Like inclusion is really about everybody because when you make a program or a lesson accessible to every kind of learner, it benefits every single learner. The things we did in programs were to make them more multimodal, more multisensory, more engaging, more active. And 4:00 on a Tuesday afternoon, whether a kid has attention issues or not.
Anyone will have attention issues then.
That's going to be a challenging time, or a Sunday morning after, sleepovers and late night movies and things like that. It's just a tough, I give a lot of credit to Hebrew school educators. They're up against a lot. And so yeah, we would go into these programs and, of course there were times where we would look at, individual kids and, help sort of bridge that gap of what was going on with them and how they might be able to talk to the families and stuff like that. And we would also do professional development sessions on how to teach Hebrew to different kinds of learners or things like that.
So you weren't personally engaging these students because that's just too much for you to do.
It wasn't like
the teachers.
Yeah, it wasn't like I ever went in and like worked one-on-one with a student, but I sort of watched to see what I thought was going on with that student, either because there was a behavior issue or because they'd been in Hebrew school for 5 years and didn't know the Hebrew alphabet, like different things. And sometimes it came from parents. Sometimes parents would bring us in to a Hebrew school or even to a day school and said, can you help the teachers figure out what's going on? And even back then, and it remains true till now, although it's becoming less of an issue now, but the big complaint oftentimes among Hebrew school educators that parents don't tell them what's going on with their kid. They don't tell them if they have special accommodations in public school. They just drop them off at Hebrew school and think it's all going to be okay. But the truth is, one of the big lessons I learned over the past 20 years at Matan is that I think oftentimes parents don't share because they really don't know what you're going to say in response. And I think parents of kids with special needs and disabilities are told no so often, and things are such a battle that they don't want their, religious, spiritual home to be one more place where they're told no. So I think that the more that congregations and synagogue schools and any Jewish education learning program, the more they're able to articulate and communicate that they're inclusive, that they aim to be inclusive, that this is what they have in place, the more feedback they get from parents, because then it's like, oh, you're not just asking me this so that like you can tell me that my kid is a problem. You're actually asking me this so that my kid can be successful. And that's probably, the biggest thing I've learned in all these years. The congregations and the schools and the camps and whomever else that are really willing to figure out where they stand when it comes to inclusion and really set inclusion goals, figure out where they are and where they want to be and effectively communicate that, the more partnership they get from parents and the more information they get about children.
Kind of like a cycle where somebody's got to take that risk first and say we're in, and then everyone's kind of jumps on board.
Yeah, definitely. And then just to sort of round out the story, because you asked me about the beginning and something else that I know I haven't answered yet. But basically, so after we were able to hire an executive director, and we went through a couple, and in 2010, so at about the 10-year mark, we had an executive director, actually Dory Fruman-Kirshner, who is still our executive director. So we went through at that point a strategic evaluation. We hired a team and we worked very closely with them and our board. And what we discovered with sort of like this New York direct service focus was that we were having a really tremendous impact on a really small number of people. Right. So if the vision was really to change the landscape of Jewish education and how Jewish education is able to include children with special needs and disabilities, then we really needed to shift our model. And it was at that point, I would say, that we started doing more research, sort of nationwide of what else was out there. And at that time, it was a lot about BJEs and their, inclusion specialists and things like that. But we were sort of like this independent entity, and we needed to figure out what to do with that. And we also needed to figure out how we fit into that landscape of sort of like the sort of much more organized Jewish world. And the interesting thing is we didn't quite fit into that model, but those have disappeared and we're still at it. So that part has been, just sort of fascinating, in terms of what we were able to sustain in the midst of, really challenging landscapes, both for, inclusion directors of BJEs and also BJEs themselves. And so what emerged was that we decided that we were going to really shift and become a real training organization. So we really put aside the direct service, me knocking on doors, and decided that this was going to be our thing. We were going to train the people on the front lines of Jewish education so that wherever they were, they could successfully include kids with special needs and disabilities.
So did you want to train them before they reached the field, or once they were already out there in different places?
Great question. So At that point, it was really, well, we had ideas about both. So at the time, we did start doing some trainings at some of the graduate schools, like at JTS and HUC. And we still do some of that. And we're involved with them in talks because we've always advocated that there should be, an inclusion track in all of these places. Because basically what happens is these Jewish educators come out of these schools as Jewish educators, never having had any exposure to inclusion or special needs. And that's just not realistic anymore. No matter what classroom you walk into, there are going to be children with learning challenges. So that
kind of reminds me as an analogy of like a medical doctor never learning anything about alternative medicine or Eastern medicine, where there's
right.
like people are interested in holistic approaches.
Yeah.
You need to know something about it,
Yeah, exactly. So, so we've really been advocating that for many years. And I think, JTS and HUC as examples are really getting much closer to that. But over the years, they've brought us in to do sessions and things like that. I've also taught online for Gratz College, so that there's some inclusion stuff. But we decided for like our sort of flagship training program, that we would create what we call the Matan Institute. And we launched it in 2012. So it was just about 2 years after the strategic evaluation. And it was another consultant, because we were thinking, well, we're not ready. We don't know. We've never done it. And a consultant said to us, if you do it, then you'll have done it.
Right.
Like, just do it. Like, the people will come. If you build it, they will come. And that's really exactly what happened. So we designed this Matan Institute that has evolved, but it started out as, I think 5 days of training, 4 or 5 days of training throughout. No, it was 4 days of training. So it was 2 days at the beginning of the year and 2 days at the end of the year. And it was geared specifically towards congregational school education directors.
Okay.
And we only marketed it at that point to people in the New York metropolitan area, sort of as a pilot. And we got applications from all over the country.
Wow.
All over, California, Texas, Florida, Michigan, everywhere.
How did people hear about it?
Well, I guess the power of social media, which didn't exist, much before this. But yeah, it was really, word of mouth, social media. But it really showed us, we've stumbled upon something here that people are really searching for. So that first cohort of the Matan Institute, we had 17 education directors from all across the country. And we hired mentors so that every participant would also work with a one-to-one Matan mentor who would help them establish and then work towards short-term and long-term goals towards inclusion in their institutions. And we also had webinars between our in-person dates. And it was a really phenomenal experience when we just felt like we were creating such ripple effects for the Jewish community, all across the country. And so from there, we expanded the program. So now we do 6 in-person days. So it's 2 at the beginning, 2 in the middle, and 2 at the end, because we felt like we didn't have enough contact with them. And our curriculum has just, skyrocketed. And what we found, so now we're in the middle of our 9th cohort of congregational school education and youth directors. We've added youth directors. And now, our curriculum, we do a whole thing about change theory and visioning. And, we bring in an expert, her name is Nancy Parks, to do that with our cohort. And we have our internal Matan speakers like myself and my colleagues, but we also bring in really heavy hitter experts
from the secular community. Yeah.
From the secular world.
Yeah.
To really teach about ADHD and anxiety and executive functioning, and really giving people, a pretty deep knowledge of, what all these things are, but also then how do you differentiate instruction for all of these different learners in your programs. So we do that over the course of a year, and the mentor component is still really important.
And the mentorship allows them, let's say if they have a specific case of a student, they can kind of bounce ideas off this person during the year and strategize with them?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So we try to focus on sort of the macro pieces of the school rather than the micro. So so when the mentors do a site visit, for example, which they'll do no matter where in the country the participants are, they're not going to go and sort of observe a 4th grade student because next year that student might not be in the school, and then we haven't solved anything, right? But we can look at, okay, this is what seems to be happening in this school when kids reach fourth grade. What's going on, in the years leading up to that? Or we seem to have, a really disproportionate number of students struggling with X, what's happening with that? Or our teachers, seem to need support in differentiating instruction, whatever it is. And so those are the kinds of things the mentors will work with them on. And also just like creating systemic change, right? So like it might be that a mentor is going to help them rewrite their registration materials so that they're asking better questions and getting more information. It might mean that they're helping them create an inclusion committee or crafting an inclusion vision statement, things that are really going to create long-term systemic change in these organizations. And so out of sort of the success of these institutes, we also expanded to create a Matan Institute for Early Childhood Educators, which we're currently in our 4th cohort of. And we've also brought the Institute out to communities. So for example, if there's like a critical mass, let's say in Washington, D.C., which we've done, we brought the Institute to Washington, D.C. so that we had 18 congregations and actually one day school participate in a regional institute. And it was the same model. It was a year, and we brought in all our speakers and all of that. And we've done it in Metro West, and we've done it in some other places, Metro West, New Jersey. But basically, just being able to see what happens when that many people from one geographic area are immersed in this learning, the whole community changes in terms of its ability to include and, just sort of the message that the community is sending. So in those cases, we partner with federations in order to bring those. We're doing 4-part series out in Los Angeles this year. And we've done, we go all over for professional development. So we love the Institute idea because it's not just a one-off, but we do the one-offs too.
You do the one-offs also. How do you deal with the fact that, obviously you're training these careerists, so to speak, these heads of institutions, but brass tacks, most of the people actually delivering the education are going to be, I work with college students, right, on campus. So many of those kids, are Hebrew school teachers or, and these are young people that there's a lot of turnover. They're not necessarily education people. So how do you deliver the information or the skills to those people who are actually in front of the kids in the classroom, even if the education director is getting this amazing wealth of knowledge?
Yeah, so it's a great question. A lot of what we do as part of the Institute is to help them understand how to teach it back to their teachers. Because basically, we're always happy to, go do a professional development. It's partly, how we bring in
Sure.
our funds, but ultimately we want them to not to have to hire outside consultants to do it. So when they participate in an institute, so they get a full binder of every presentation that's being done at the Institute. They also get it on Thumb Drive or Google Drive, so they have it all electronically. And we really workshop with them, how they can take this and bring it back to their teachers. I think unlike other places, we're not looking to be proprietary. We're really looking for them to take it and share it back. And so, one of the things a mentor might do is to help them create a professional development for their staff. And some of them feel more at ease with that than others. Some of them are still going to ask us to come do it, and of course we'll do that. But the real intention is to empower them with the knowledge and with the skills to be able to do it. Recognizing that we're not giving them a master's in special education,
right,
or anything like that, but really giving them sort of the tools that they need to work with their teachers. And then, when we go into different communities, we do train a lot of classroom teachers.
Frontline teachers.
Yeah.
I'm curious, how did when you switched models, so to speak, how did the people that were, or the institutions that were receiving services previously, how did they react? Was that a difficult switch for people to kind of wrap their heads around?
Somewhat, but we really created an exit strategy. So it was over a period of like 3 years.
Okay.
So, we didn't take on new clients in that same capacity, but we didn't just drop them. We created like a 3-year exit plan. And part of that exit plan included, having the directors participate in an institute.
The cohort, right.
Because what we were finding also was that people were sort of outsourcing inclusion, which also, is sort of
ironic.
So like we didn't like we really no longer wanted people to feel like, oh, well, we're doing inclusion because we brought Matan in. Well, Matan was doing inclusion, and it was great that the organization was willing to bring us in, but we really wanted the organization to be able to, do inclusion.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
Now, did you have to transition to becoming more of a fundraiser, or is that really the executive director who deals with that? Like, what's your role at this point in the organization's life cycle?
So the fundraising is basically the reason I didn't ever want to be the executive director.
Right.
So, business school was not, on my list ever. Well, maybe at some point, but no time recently. But so yeah, our executive director is really the fundraising point person, but she and I are definitely writing partners. So I do a lot of grant writing at this point, like
right.
a lot of grant writing and, grant reporting and things like that. But also, creating the curricula for these institutes keeps me pretty busy because every cohort is a little bit different, and we never want to feel like it's sort of like this plug and play program. When people apply to the Institute, we ask a bunch of questions about like their greatest challenges and what they have in place already and things like that. And so we really want to make sure that we're answering to those. And actually, one of the things we do is on big sort of poster boards at the beginning of an institute, we print out what they listed as their challenges and what they listed as what they hope to learn. And it's so that they can see each other's, but also really to hold ourselves accountable,
Yep.
that this is what we're here for and this is what we're going to address. And, I guess probably as with any program, like the longer you do it, the more you want to add to it and the more you want to change it and the more you want to make it better. So I do a lot of that. And like right now we're working on one of the things our past participants, because now we have about almost 200 alumni participants, and we continue to evaluate. We do sort of like longitudinal evaluations. And one of the things we're asked a lot is sort of like, what's next? Can you do a follow-up? Can you do, so right now we're crafting an Institute 2.0 that will be specifically for people who have already participated but want to go deeper into a particular topic. So they could sign up for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, but each day will focus on a particular topic that they've sort of ranked as being the most relevant to their work at this point. And so things like that, and also my job is talking to communities. So anybody who sends an inquiry to Matan, I'm the one who reaches out, and like somebody from Tucson Federation reached out and, we're interested in bringing Matan, but what would that mean? And what do you do? And this is what our community thinks it needs. And really like building those relationships and helping communities figure out what would be the best use of their time and money, if we were to come out. And I do a lot, I do a fair amount of traveling. Because often
Sounds like it.
oftentimes I will be the one that goes out to, to present or,
right.
Things like that. So, yeah, but we have a great team. I mean, Dory is amazing. And we have Michelle Steinhardt is our mentor coordinator. So she took that off my plate, which has been amazing. So she oversees all the mentors for the ed director and youth director cohort so that there's, a real layer of oversight. And we created a mentor curriculum so that the mentors check in each month with their people, and there's like things that they can study further and, articles they can read and questions they can be asking. And so, yeah, we have a great team.
It's incredible. It sounds like it. And a great team that's headed by a great and passionate leader. Your love and care for this topic is really abundantly evident, and it's inspiring. Anything else that people should know about Matan, and also where can people learn about it online?
Sure. So Matan's website is matankids.org. So it's just Matan, MATAN, kids, KIDS.org. And there people can find out about our institutes, about the various trainings that we do. But really, everything we do is pretty customized to the needs of a community. Sometimes we'll work with federations to do sort of a community assessment to figure out where their community is at in terms of inclusion and what would be the best next steps forward. We also have a relatively new Madrichim training curriculum so that congregations can purchase a curriculum to train their teenage assistants, because teen assistants are huge. I mean, they're like this huge commodity for religious schools and even some youth programs, but they're not often trained to be able to really make the biggest impact that they can. So my colleague, Rabbi Ruti Riggin, and I, who is our disability rabbinic scholar in residence, she and I created a teen curriculum so that organizations don't need to have us come out and do it. They can really implement it on their own, and it has sort of all the PowerPoints and video links and handouts and everything that they need to train their Madrichim. So there's some information about that on there. We do a monthly webinar series that's free and public that, anybody's welcome to join, sign up for our mailing list.
Wow, incredible. So much there. And really, Matan means gift, and it or giving. And this is really sounds like an organization that has been a gift, not only to all of these children and their families, but to the community at large. So thank you for creating and perpetuating that gift. Meredith Polsky, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
This has been Ari Koretsky on Jews You Should Know. Please visit us at JewsYouShouldKnow.com and subscribe at iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you consume podcasts. Find us on social media at Jews You Should Know. If you'd like to become a supporter of this podcast, we would greatly appreciate that, and you can do so by visiting patreon.com. That's patreon.com/Jews You Should Know. Finally, if you have enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review so that we can continue to grow and introduce many more people to Jews You Should Know.